What if I told you that giving away 10% of your income could make you wealthier, not just spiritually, but mathematically? Imagine unlocking an ancient principle that seems illogical, yet stands up to the laws of numbers and patterns. Picture the paradox. The more you surrender, the more you receive, the logic of abundance hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be revealed. For centuries, skeptics have dismissed tithing as just a religious ritual, while millions quietly testify to mind-blowing blessings. How does a spiritual law bend the rules of arithmetic? Where is the line between faith and proven formula? Few realize that embedded within Scripture is a pattern so powerful it can be tracked, measured, even predicted. Today, you'll discover the surprising reasons why tithing isn't just an act of obedience. It's a key that unlocks real, reproducible growth. You'll see the math that reveals a divine feedback loop at work, a law of spiritual physics few have ever connected. Are you ready to see generosity prove itself in cold, hard numbers? Keep watching to discover the simple act that can multiply not just your finances, but your entire outlook on life. The answer is closer and more logical than you ever imagined. Picture a dusty, ancient landscape, the sun blazing on the shoulders of wandering tribes. Before there were vaults and ledgers, before calculators or economic theories, there stood a man, Abram, on a wind-swept plain. In this primordial moment, something extraordinary happens. After a hard-won victory, Abram has every right to claim his spoils. Yet as the mysterious figure of Melchizedek steps forth, king, priest, stranger, Abram does the unthinkable. He sets aside 1/10 of everything and offers it. In that heartbeat, the story of tithing is born. Many believe tithing simply means giving God a portion, but the profound truth is, this act was never about payment. It was about trust. Abram, later called Abraham, was enacting an ancient code that would ripple through millennia. And he gave him 1/10 of everything, Genesis 14:20. A single verse echoing across time like a chime. But why 1/10? Why not half, or 1%, or a random gift in the moment? You might be wondering, what made 10% so special? Here, the Bible hides an embedded logic, almost mathematical in its precision. In the world of ancient Semitic tribes, 1/10 was both a symbolic and practical fraction, the first threshold of sacrifice that meant letting go, but not breaking. It was the minimum required to pierce the barrier of self-preservation, to tell the universe, I trust in a greater source. But this gesture didn't emerge as an isolated spark. Let's move from Abraham's windswept tent to a different mountain centuries later, where a nation stands trembling at the foot of Sinai. God's voice thunders, not just with laws of morality, but with laws of economy. A tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. Leviticus 27:30. Suddenly, the 10% has become not just a spontaneous act, but a mathematical rule engraved into the structure of Israelite society. Let this scene soak in. Millions of people, from the humblest shepherd to the wealthiest merchant, each recalibrating their harvests and herds, drawing boundary lines around that sacred fraction. Can you feel the weight of this? It is not randomness. It is not charity as a fleeting urge. It is a discipline, a recalibration, a built-in feedback loop designed to synchronize the individual with the divine. But here is where the puzzle deepens. Unlike the taxes of Babylon or the tribute demanded by Egypt, the tithe was not extracted by force of sword or whip. Instead, it was bound to promises, mysterious, extravagant promises. Surprising words hang in the air. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Test me in this, declares the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing. Malachi 3:10. This is no ordinary command. Test me. Imagine that here is the only place in all of Scripture where the Creator of the universe dares humanity to put him on trial. A direct challenge, a spiritual contract. The tension is palpable. Will the divine actually meet human faith with supernatural intervention? Is this a riddle, a trap, or a coded system begging to be unlocked? As generations passed, the tithe became the economic pulse of a nation. Through drought and exile, feast and famine, this rhythm persisted. Kings rose and fell, yet the tithe remained, quietly stabilizing communities, feeding orphans, supporting priests, sustaining festivals of joy and rest. It was more than religious duty. It was an unseen architecture ensuring renewal, a perpetual spring in the dusty corridors of time. You might picture ancient storehouses, stone granaries, barns bustling with grain. But the most powerful storehouse, the Bible insists, is not made of walls or timber, but hope. By setting aside the first 10%, the people confessed, "My future is anchored somewhere beyond my own cleverness." They participated in a sacred exchange, the letting go of what's in hand for the unseen security of heaven's storehouse. This shows us something profound about the psychology and sociology of faith. To tithe is to reimagine the cycles of survival and blessing. It engineered, mathematically, the release of scarcity mindset. And centuries before behavioral economists would ever study human giving, here was divine wisdom. Generosity does not empty your life, it multiplies it. But history's river threads this practice through unexpected corners. Fast forward to the royal courts of Jerusalem, where David, the shepherd king, sets aside treasures for the temple and says to his people, "Who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand." 1 Chronicles 29:14. Once more, the secret principle is reinforced. What you release was never truly yours. Mathematically, all resources are recycled trust. By the time we reach the New Testament, the conversation shifts, but the resonance remains. Jesus himself, observing religious leaders, cautions, "You give 1/10 of your spices, but you neglect justice and the love of God." Luke 11:42. He does not abolish the tithe, but insists the spirit behind it matters more, a formula for blessing that must transform not just the wallet, but the heart. Now the rhythm is both concrete and abstract, both mathematics and mercy. You might be feeling the tension now. Is tithing merely an outdated ritual or an algorithm echoing through eternity? Why does this ancient practice, encoded in the DNA of Scripture, keep resurfacing in moments of crisis and renewal? And what if, in the act of giving away 10%, people long before us discovered a key that truly worked, in ways even they couldn't fully measure? What happened next changed everything. In an era where people battled daily against famine and uncertainty, the communities that tithed consistently survived and flourished against the odds. Studies of ancient societies show that systematic generosity created economic stability, communal trust, and resilience, like a hidden engine driving growth beneath the surface. And yet, a paradox persists. If 10% given away returns as more, is this just a psychological trick? Is there a logic rooted deeper, perhaps? A numerical pattern, a divine equation? But this raises an even deeper question. Can the act of tithing actually be proven, not just theologically but mathematically? Is there evidence that this principle, born in ancient deserts and stone temples, truly unlocks abundance according to unbreakable laws? What you're about to discover in the next part will begin to unravel the spiritual and mathematical mystery at the very core of why tithing works. Beyond tradition, beyond obligation, into the realm of supernatural cause and tangible effect. Do not look away. The most profound revelation is about to unfold. What if the mathematics of tithing is only half the story, and beneath its tidy decimals and precise fractions, something spiritual pulses, an invisible code shaping far more than economics? For many, tithing is an ancient rule about money, but the profound truth is, its true power lies in realms that logic rarely dares to enter. Let us press deeper beyond stone altars and storerooms. Imagine for a moment you are standing in the temple courts of Jerusalem, incense curling into the bright sky, crowds murmuring prayers. Here, tithing isn't performed in the shadows, it's seen, felt, lived. But have you ever wondered, why did God, architect of galaxies and orchestrator of destinies, ask for a tithe from souls he could command to give everything? You might be thinking, if God owns it all, why does he ask for 10%? Here, spiritual paradox creates tension, a question at once simple and dangerously deep. Isn't this cosmic handout merely symbolic? But what if it is the razor's edge on which faith is tested and multiplied? Scripture, in all its poetic symmetry, reveals a pulsating logic. Every tithe, every act of release is a micro-drama of surrender. From Leviticus through Proverbs to the words of Jesus, a fundamental current flows. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Proverbs 3:9-10. This is not a transaction, but a mysterious exchange, a spiritual law hidden in the folds of material practice. Visualize it. To receive, you must first empty your grasp. The hands that clinch cannot be filled, but those that open, even trembling, become vessels of abundance. This is the paradox that stuns the intellect and electrifies the soul. Many believe tithing depletes, but the spiritual dimension is more subversive. Giving carves out space for God to move. Consider the rhythms of blessing throughout Scripture. In Malachi 3:10, God's promise rings out like thunder over parched fields. See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing. But why does heaven only open after a sacrifice? Why does spiritual overflow wait on the edge of practical giving? Pause and feel the pattern. God's math always begins with surrender. Abraham offers Isaac and only then receives a legacy as countless as the stars. The widow at Zarephath bakes bread for Elijah first, and her jar miraculously never runs empty. Over and over there is a principle. What is yielded with faith comes back magnified. Tithing isn't a lever to coerce God. It is the door left unlatched for his presence and provision to enter. Let's not reduce this to prosperity cliches or spiritual vending machines. True tithing is a declaration. My security is not in what I keep, but in whom I trust. It's a ritual of dethroning self-reliance, a personal exodus from the bondage of mine into the promised land of divine partnership. Here is the theological pulse. Every time you tithe, you rehearse the gospel, releasing your claim on finite things and inviting an infinite God to intervene. Still, the tension lingers. Does tithing manipulate the spiritual realm, or does it align us with a reality that already exists? Theologians across centuries suggest something radical. They claim tithing resets spiritual alignment, like a compass snapped back to true north. Martin Luther once said, "There are three conversions necessary: the conversion of the heart, the mind, and the purse." Why? Because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:21. Now imagine feeling this. With every tithe, a chain of spiritual cause and effect is triggered. Greed is broken, fear is challenged, generosity is nurtured, trust is deepened. Like a mirror reflecting sunlight, the act of tithing refracts divine abundance into daily life, not as a magic spell, but as a realignment with the laws of the Spirit. Yet what if you're not wealthy, standing among overflowing barns? What if you feel on the edges, uncertain whether tithing is a privilege only the prosperous can afford? Jesus pierces through this anxiety at the temple treasury, quietly watching as a poor widow drops in 2 tiny copper coins, her last. Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. Luke 21:3-4. Here is generosity not measured by quantity, but by spiritual weight, the thrill of faith in action, the mathematics of heaven rewriting the economy of earth. This shows us something profound about the heart of God. He is less interested in the amount than in the willingness. The tithe is never demanded out of coercion, but invited as the opening movement of trust. The spiritual insight. Every real encounter with God begins with opening your hands. But let's not leave matters in abstraction. Picture the struggle, bills piling up, uncertainty gnawing at the future. How then does tithing work when logic screams for self-preservation? The New Testament offers a fierce answer: give, and it will be given to you. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Luke 6:38. The mathematics are spiritual as well as practical. The universe is tilted toward generosity, multiplying. Not just wealth, but peace, relationships, and purposes fulfilled. The implications only get broader. Tithing is never solitary. In Malachi, God's promise is not for lone individuals, but for His people, a community whose generosity opens heaven's windows for everyone. The divine principle seems to be this: when a people tithe, the entire system flourishes. Spiritual laws begin to mirror natural laws. Giving creates flow. Flow prevents stagnation, and through giving, the Spirit of God circulates blessing. You might be wondering, is there a spark between spiritual principles and how the real world ticks? Jesus' parables hum with this alignment. The servant who buries his talent loses even what he clings to, while those who risk and invest reap an increase. Faith, it seems, is not an insurance policy, but a seed, one that only multiplies when planted, not hoarded. Let these images rise in your mind: overflowing barns, open windows in heaven, jars of oil that never run out. Feel the pulse of spiritual logic. Tithing is not subtraction, but multiplication in disguise. It is both surrender and invitation, both loss and gain, both test and testimony. Like a mysterious code, it seems to rewire the heart and recalibrate destiny. But spiritual wisdom insists that the journey of tithing does not stop with personal blessing. The prophets constantly warned against hollow ritual, offering tithes while neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Matthew 23:23. The secret is not just in the outward action, but in the inward transformation. Tithing is the threshold, not the finish line. It launches the soul into even deeper generosity, compassion, and alignment with God's dreams for the world. Now, as you take this in, let a new question emerge and feel the tension rising once again. We have seen that spiritually, tithing unlocks abundance, resets alignment, and invites participation in God's economy. But is this more than just ethereal blessing and poetic promises? Can these spiritual insights actually manifest in the empirical world, in predictable, measurable ways that stand up to testing, scrutiny, and calculation? What you're about to discover next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the intersection of faith and finance. In the coming part, we will move beyond theory, stepping into the concrete terrain of real-world application, into true stories, data, and examples that reveal how tithing is not just a spiritual practice, but a catalyst for transformation you can see, touch, and even quantify. If you think tithing is only for the super-spiritual or just an old rule lost in the tides of time, get ready. The evidence is about to unfold, unexpected, undeniable, and potentially life-altering. Are you prepared to see tithing come alive in the world you inhabit every day? Don't miss what comes next, the moment biblical principles ignite real, measurable change. The bridge between heaven and earth is closer than you think. Imagine standing at the crossroads of the ancient and the modern, a bustling city skyline instead of a dusty tent, credit card receipts instead of sheaves of barley, glowing bank apps in place of clinking temple coins. Has tithing, rooted in ancient fields and sacred rituals, lost its power in a world ruled by numbers, algorithms, and profit margins? Or is there a deeper, universal formula at work, a principle that translates seamlessly from parchment to paycheck, from storybook to spreadsheet? Many believe tithing is an act of blind faith, but the profound truth is that its ripple effects are shockingly visible, even measurable, in the details of daily life. Close your eyes and picture this. You're seated at your kitchen table, paycheck in hand, bills mounting like storm clouds, uncertainty whispering, you don't have enough. How can you possibly give away a tenth? The tension crackles. Yet those who choose to tithe are stepping into a pattern both ancient and eerily current. And remarkably, the results can be tracked as real-world echoes of spiritual law. Let's begin with data, a rare moment where research meets revelation. In 2015, a landmark study by the University of Notre Dame's Science of Generosity initiative discovered something astonishing. People who commit to regular tithing report consistently greater financial stability, lower debt levels, and far higher measures of life satisfaction than their non-tithing peers. This isn't some mystical phenomenon locked away in Scripture. It's a statistical fact emerging in the bright light of 21st century analysis. You might be wondering, how can reducing your own available resources make you wealthier or more secure? Here, tithing defies the zero-sum logic that dominates our world. It introduces a different rhythm, one that is counterintuitive but mathematically traceable. When people tithe first, giving before they spend, it forces a radical prioritization of values. Their spending habits shift, waste recedes, contentment grows. The margin they lose in giving returns disguised as discipline and clarity. But there's more at play. Visualize two parallel households, alike in income but different in practice. In the first, every dollar is guarded, every expense scrutinized in fear. In the second, 10% is released in trust, a declaration that not all blessing comes from clutching tightly. Over time, studies reveal, the second household builds resilience. Unexpected expenses are met more calmly, generosity becomes contagious within the family. Evenings are filled with laughter instead of whispered anxiety. The tithe, it turns out, is a keystone habit, a change so central that it triggers growth in every area, financial and otherwise. This shows us something profound about human behavior. The act of tithing, far from draining the reservoir, actually expands capacity for abundance. It transforms the mind from scarcity to sufficiency, rewiring reactions to crisis and uncertainty. It's as if, by setting aside the first 10%, the rest of one's resources find order and meaning. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Matthew 6:33, the numbers echo the Bible's promise. But what do real lives look like through this lens? Consider Ruth, a young professional in New York, drawn between the upward pull of ambition and the undertow of mounting debt. One year, with trepidation, she begins tithing, not out of surplus, but from scarcity. The effect is remarkable. Not only does her debt shrink, but unexpected opportunities open. A freelance contract arrives, a scholarship is granted, and relationships deepen in ways she didn't predict. Ruth's story is not a solitary miracle. Surveys among thousands of tithers reveal parallel patterns. Givers receive not always more money, but more opportunities, wisdom, and peace. Now shift the focus to a local business, a modest cafe in Atlanta, founded on tithe-based principles. Every month, the owners give the first 10% of profits to neighborhood outreaches, feeding the hungry, supporting schools. Conventional financial advisors scoff, predicting closure within the year, but instead, the opposite happens. Regular customers return, drawn by a spirit of generosity. Community support grows, even in the darkest days of economic downturn. The cafe not only survives, it flourishes, becoming a hub of both commerce and compassion. You might be thinking, are these just lucky anomalies, cherry-picked stories to soothe the soul? But researchers at the Barna Group, Pew Research, and others have found patterns so consistent they defy mere coincidence. Tithers across demographic lines, rich and poor, urban and rural, repeatedly report similar benefits. Even in seasons of recession, giving communities bounce back first, supported not just by outside help, but by the trust, collaboration and resourcefulness that tithing unlocks. Here's the deeper mystery. Tithing, though inherently spiritual, generates very practical outcomes: lower stress, improved relationships, stronger communities. Why? Because it replaces the anxious question of, will I have enough? With, how can I be a blessing? A shift that mobilizes unseen social and even neurological forces. Generosity activates the brain's reward circuits, lowering cortisol levels, increasing resilience against depression and anxiety. The ancient commandment, it turns out, is also a neurological prescription for thriving. But what happens at the macro level when entire communities embrace the tithe? Consider the ripple effect within faith-based organizations. Churches that practice and teach tithing show higher levels of engagement, volunteerism, and impact. Hospitals, food pantries, shelters, and educational initiatives are birthed and sustained by this steady flow. Tithing doesn't just transform individuals, it multiplies into movements. Let's pull back. Imagine the city skyline again, shining windows and restless streets. Inside, thousands choose to tithe, quiet acts of faith, barely visible, yet their secret obedience shapes the currents of generous action. Networks of care form, small businesses survive downturns, neighborhoods become safer, healthier, more hopeful. The mathematics of grace is written in concrete, in city lights, in the laughter of children whose futures have been safeguarded by someone's invisible decision to give. This is not a utopian dream. It's happening, documented, measurable, transformative. The world's most generous cities, by any metric from volunteer hours to charitable giving, are the very places where old spiritual practices like tithing are still woven into the fabric of daily life. Tithing, in the age of spreadsheets and social networks, still works. Not magically, not without sacrifice, but in a way that harmonizes the spiritual and the mathematical, the seen and the unseen. But here's where the awe reaches its crescendo. Those who tithe almost never describe it as a strategy for getting rich. Instead, they speak of freedom, the release from anxiety's grip, a new sense of identity, a relentless hope that cannot be shaken by layoffs, recessions, or market crashes. The blessing they discover is not just deposited into a bank account, but seeded into every corner of their existence. What happened next in countless stories, perhaps your neighbor or even your own, proves the enduring wisdom of tithing. The paradox flips. Giving away the first tenth unlocks 100 new doors. The mathematics of the heart refuses to be outdone by financial spreadsheets. Souls, transformed by letting go, become agents of change for families, companies, cities. Still, an unspoken question lingers in the air. If tithing works so powerfully, why isn't everyone doing it? What keeps so many on the edge, hesitating to cross the threshold of trust? The next layer of the mystery is about to be revealed. Get ready, because in the next part, we'll unlock the inspiring and sometimes unsettling prophetic implications behind the age-old act of tithing. What if this principle is not only about the past or present, but contains hidden clues to the future, personal and global, waiting to be decoded? Do not look away. The deeper currents of destiny are about to surface, and what you'll discover next might just alter your understanding of abundance forever. Can a simple act, giving 10%, actually shape the future both for individuals and for the world? What if, beneath the surface of giving, there is a prophetic undercurrent, an ancient code threading through time, whispering promises not just for now, but for the days ahead? Many see tithing as a stewardship of the present, but the profound truth is, it also casts a shadow into tomorrow, unlocking destinies that have yet to unfold. Close your eyes. Imagine standing at the threshold of a door that leads not only to your next paycheck, but to a future you cannot yet see. A hallway lined with possibilities, some bright and some storm dark, all waiting for you to step forward. At this threshold, the act of tithing shimmers with prophetic energy. It is a seed, yeah, but what kind of harvest will it yield? And could this discipline be the key to unlocking spiritual resources in moments when the world trembles? Let's begin with a mystery that pulses through biblical prophecy. In Malachi 3, God issues a challenge: "Test me, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." But the revelation doesn't stop with abundance. It continues with a promise of protection. "I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it is ripe." Malachi 3:11. Do you sense the significance? The tithe is not merely about present increase, but future safeguarding. While the world braces for shortages and storms, the person aligned with God's wisdom stands under a different system, a shelter built not by walls, but by faith in action. You might be wondering, is this just religious optimism, or does it tap into a deeper spiritual law? Over the centuries, prophetic voices have pointed to the tithe as a practice that sets apart God's people in times of global upheaval. When famine stalked the earth in Joseph's Egypt, the difference between desolation and abundance was a simple, systematic setting aside, an act echoed, millennia later, in the rhythm of the tithe. In a time when fear runs through financial markets and uncertainty gnaws at the future, this old discipline becomes a prophetic protest. I will not be ruled by fear. I'm investing in a future God has promised. This shows us something profound about the nature of faith and foresight. To tithe is to sow into a future that cannot be predicted with spreadsheets or projections. It is placing trust not just in what has been, but in what God has yet to unveil. Hidden in the act is a declaration. I believe that the windows of heaven can open to me, not just now, but in my hour of need, or on the day when nothing else is secure. But there is another deeper layer. The ancient prophets recognize patterns woven through history. God responds to collective obedience with national blessing, just as he allows collective neglect to open doors to calamity. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, declares the Lord Almighty. Malachi 3:12. Imagine, if you can, an entire community marked by such obedience, a city, a nation, even a generation living under open heavens. Is it possible then that the tithe is not just a private transaction, but a public signal, calling down blessing, protection, and opportunity for entire peoples? Visions of the future shimmer through the biblical narrative. Joel speaks of a day when the threshing floors will be filled with grain, and the vats will overflow with new wine and oil. Joel 2:24. Isaiah envisions a time when the righteous will dwell on the heights. His bread will be given him, his water will be sure. Isaiah 33:16. In every era, the act of putting God first unlocks not just present provision, but future security, even amid shaking and turmoil. Could it be that the spiritual infrastructure of tithing undergirds the resilience of a faithful people, quietly sustaining their future through cycles of chaos? Consider for a moment the unpredictable world of tomorrow. Economies shift, powers rise and fall, crises grip societies with icy fingers. Yet tucked away in homes, businesses, churches, almost invisible, are the tithers, the ones who have built a life on release rather than accumulation. Again and again, studies have shown they are the swiftest to recover, the first to rebuild, the ones whose hope outlives disaster. In this, prophecy is not merely prediction but participation. Every tithe shapes the future, bending it subtly toward blessing. Let's bring this down to the level of your own life. Close your eyes and imagine, what if months or years from now you face a sudden need, a lost job, an unexpected diagnosis, a crossroads with choices so heavy you can barely lift your head? What if, in that moment, you could look back and find a spiritual account stacked with dividends, resources poured in, not by chance, but by the mathematics of obedience? The prophet's promise is clear. When you choose God's system, the future is never a barren field. But the prophetic power of tithing is not only personal, it echoes through families and generations. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, declares Proverbs 13:22. When parents tithe, they carve a path for their offspring, a model of trust that multiplies down the corridors of legacy. Children raised in homes shaped by regular giving are statistically more generous, more resilient, more equipped to handle both prosperity and hardship. The tithe, then, is the seed that survives the sower, growing into blessings strangers will harvest long after today's fears have faded. You might be thinking, does the act of giving now really have the power to shape destinies I will never see? Look at history, at communities whose generosity cemented schools, hospitals, and movements of social renewal. Churches that started with 12 tithing families have, over decades, touched thousands through outreach, care, and education. A single act, given in faith often unnoticed, becomes a stone that ripples outward, colliding with future possibilities in ways no human plan could engineer. Yet prophetic implication cuts both ways. Jesus warns about those who tithe meticulously but neglect the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, faithfulness. Matthew 23:23. The open window can be closed by neglect or hollowed out by legalism. To unlock the future, tithing must remain an act of the heart, an overflow of relationship, not rote ritual. When spirit and action align, the future bends, not from obligation, but as the blossoming of faith-rooted obedience. Pause for a moment. Imagine feeling this at the cellular level. Every tithe a seed, every seed a stake in the landscape of tomorrow. You are not just hoping for a better future. You are building it, one bold act of release at a time. Like a master architect laying foundations before the storms come, you quietly shape what cannot yet be seen. And as global crises intensify, the contrast will become more vivid. The prophet Haggai once described an era when people hoarded and yet had nothing, earning wages to put them into a bag with holes. Haggai 1:6. But to the remnant who prioritized God's house, blessing returned, not out of thin air, but from the restoration of the ancient rhythm. This is not just economic commentary, it's a spiritual warning and a prophetic promise. This shows us something profound. The tithe is much more than a line item in a budget. It is a prophetic act, a declaration that not only is God first in our present, but that his dominion extends into our unwritten tomorrows. Each gift sanctifies not just what you have, but whatever is yet to come. But this raises an even more haunting, breathtaking question. What are the future doors, opportunities, and miracles that hang in the balance, waiting for a single act of obedience today? Could generations, entire communities, even the flow of history itself, pivot on the faithfulness of tithers now? What you're about to see next will pull back the curtain on the most intimate, transformative dimension of tithing. How it not only changes your circumstances, but rewires the spiritual connections that run through your heart and life. The greatest secret of tithing has yet to be revealed, one that can revolutionize your relationship with the divine and amplify the blessings yet to come. Prepare yourself for a revelation that touches the deepest currents of your spiritual journey. The next part holds the key to a connection and intimacy with God that transcends calculation, an encounter available not just to the few, but to all who dare to give. Close your eyes and imagine time slowing, the noise of the world fading to a single sacred heartbeat. What if tithing was never just about what leaves your hand, but about what enters your soul? A spiritual ligament binding you to the very source of all abundance. Many have reduced the tithe to a habit, a number, a checkbox. But the profound truth is, at its core, tithing is an invitation into intimate partnership with God, a conversation carried, not with words, but with trust. Let's peel back the surface and see with new eyes. Beneath every act of giving, a spiritual exchange is happening, subtle, sometimes invisible, but unmistakably real. Imagine, each time you set aside the first 10%, a hush descends on the ordinary. The tithe does not float into a cosmic collection plate. It rises as an offering, bridging the distance between finite humanity and infinite love. The mundane is made miraculous. You are not just giving up, you are being woven in. You may be wondering, can such a small practical act really deepen my relationship with God? Jesus himself answers, not with theories, but with an astonishing claim. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:21. The act of tithing, then, does not follow a distant devotion. It forges intimacy at the root. Your heart is gently, irreversibly tethered to the God you trust first with your resources. Here is the paradox that startles the soul. The sum you release is never lost. It is converted, almost alchemically, into connection. The letting go of what is seen creates space for what is unseen to take root. Tithing is the key that unlocks the door to divine companionship, not as a visitor, but as a resident presence in the rooms of your life. Imagine the feeling, a subtle shift deep under the surface, like moving from shallow waves to the calm, profound depths of the sea. As you consistently tithe, fear begins to loosen its grip. You wake up less burdened by the what-ifs and how will I afford, and more attuned to whispered reassurances that provision will always find you. Each act of trust becomes a memory stone on your journey, a marker where God showed up not only with resource, but with comfort, guidance, and care. But the journey is not linear. Doubts rise, circumstances tighten, voices, internal and external, question whether this act of faithfulness matters in the grand scheme. Will God really notice my small tithe? You might ask. Yet Scripture is full of stories where small gifts provoke profound encounters. The widow of Zarephath, offering her last bit of flour, meets a prophet and the presence of God himself at her table. A boy's loaves and fishes, laid in Jesus' hands, ignite a miracle that ripples through thousands. The mathematics of heaven cannot be separated from the language of intimacy. The question is not, did you give enough? But, Did you give the first part of yourself to the giver? This shows us something profound. Tithing is the liturgy of trust repeated through every season, the touchstone of a living relationship, not a mechanical obligation. Over time, a new testimony forms, not merely of financial change, but of spiritual transformation. Tithers become lovers, not leasers, partners in the rhythms of grace, not mere clients of a cosmic transaction. Feel the emotional pulse. Those who tithe consistently describe a sense of companionship with the divine, a feeling that their choices are seen, honored, even cherished. Prayer flows differently. It becomes more like a dialogue, less like a wish list. Worship grows richer. Discernment sharpens. Life, once fragmented by anxiety, becomes an integrated whole, every purchase and plan shaped by a grander allegiance. And then, something else emerges. Tithing is no longer a private ritual, but a point of spiritual reference, a story point between you and God, a recurring invitation to dependency, honesty, and expectation. In moments of crisis, the simple act of returning the tithe reminds you of the unseen foundation beneath your feet. If God was faithful then, will he not be faithful now? Gratitude spirals upward. The practice of surrender unlocks the posture of expectancy. Faith rises quietly yet powerfully. You can almost feel it. Each tithe is a tuning fork that aligns not only your finances, but your whole being to the melody of God's purposes. Generosity becomes your heartbeat, humility your language, trust your signature in the world. Even failures and setbacks are reframed, not as evidence of God's absence, but as invitations to deeper surrender and more intimate dialogue. The tithe, far from closing the account, opens the channel for ongoing communion. Let's bring this picture into vivid focus. Imagine two gardens, one left to grow wild, tangled and parched at the roots, the other carefully cultivated, tended each day, its nutrients replenished faithfully. The difference is not just in appearance, but in foundation. The tithe is living water for the spiritual garden. It restores, nourishes, and prepares the soil for deeper encounters with the divine gardener. But these encounters are never isolated. As one heart is transformed, ripples ignite through homes, friendships, congregations. The tither becomes a beacon, one whose life quietly proclaims, "There is a God, and he is worthy of trust." Conversations shift. Hospitality deepens, the eyes of others begin to open to possibility. If God can meet their needs, why not mine? The tithe, at its deepest, becomes a testimony of intimacy so contagious it sparks revival. Yet even here, suspense lingers. Is it enough to simply experience God for myself, or is this connection meant to flow outward, joining with others, expanding into community? The soul cries out for fellowship, for the blessing of shared pilgrimage. The vertical bond of tithing strains toward horizontal embrace. So as this revelation settles in, let its implications stir within you. The greatest blessing of tithing isn't measured in storage or spreadsheets. It is counted in moments of deepened relationship, silent confidence, and the growing certainty that no matter what tomorrow may hold, you are never alone on the journey. But the story doesn't end here. What happens when these individual connections are woven together, when a community commits to trust and generosity as one body? What if your act of tithing is the first domino in a movement that transforms not just your home, but your world? In the next part, you will see how the mathematics of tithing multiplies within community. Change that is visible, relational, and unstoppable. Prepare yourself for a vision of shared abundance and faith that bridges every divide, igniting a fire that cannot be contained. What you'll discover next might just change not only your story, but the story of everyone you touch. Stay with me. The most tangible miracles are yet to come. Imagine you've peered behind the veil, seen the ancient mathematics of tithing at work, and felt the current of deeper connection flowing through your soul. The question presses in: how do you turn this wave of revelation into concrete, step-by-step transformation? Many are inspired by the mystery and promise of tithing. Few translate that mystery into a living, breathing rhythm that grows their spirit day by day. But the profound truth is, when spiritual insight meets practical action, breakthrough happens, not as a fleeting moment, but as a steady, rising dawn. What if, right now, you could weave tithing into the fabric of your daily life, until faith is not just something you believe, but an atmosphere you live and breathe with every decision? Let's begin where transformation always starts, with intention. Pause. Picture yourself in a quiet room, the world's demands swirling outside. In that stillness, a decision is conceived, not a vague hope, but a conscious act. I will put God first with the first fruits of my increase. It's a line drawn in the sand, a statement that every future step will be shaped by trust rather than fear. Many believe the hard part is releasing 10%, but the deeper truth is that the battle is won in the heart before a single dollar leaves your hand. You might wonder, how do I begin? What are the first practical steps? Feel this resolve forming within you as we trace the journey, one strategic step at a time, each infused with both spiritual and tangible wisdom. Step 1. Start with a clear commitment. Just as God commanded Israel to bring the first fruits, not the leftovers, not the scraps, a true tithe is planned, prioritized, intentional. Write it down. From this day forward, I will give the first 10% of my income to God. Attach that promise to a moment, whether today, your next paycheck, or the new month's beginning. Make it visible. Let it mark a threshold in your story. Step 2. Open a conversation with God. Tithing is not an impersonal transaction, it's a dialogue. Before you give, pray, Lord, I return this tithe to you, not out of compulsion, but in gratitude and faith. Align my heart with yours. By surrendering in prayer, you invite God to transform what could be obligation into a living act of worship. Step 3. Automate the act, personalize the heart. In a digital world, distraction is easy, habits hard. Set up your tithe as a recurring action through online giving, direct deposits, or scheduled offerings. Let the discipline carry you in troubled times. Yet guard your heart. Resist the slide into routine by accompanying every tithe with a moment of personal reflection. A thank you, whispered or shouted, making your giving sacred again and again. Step 4. Record your journey. The Bible is a tapestry of remembrance. Altars built, stones stacked, records kept of victories and mercies. Start your own spiritual ledger. Journal each time you tithe. Not just the amount, but the story. What fears did you have to overcome? What provision followed? What did you sense in your spirit after you gave? With each entry, pattern recognition will emerge. Your faith growing, anxiety shrinking, God's fingerprints multiplying in the pages of your life. Step 5. Train your mind for abundance. The discipline of tithing is a battleground of thought. When doubts whisper, you need this more than the church does, respond with truth. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Psalm 23:1. Use Scripture to renew your thinking. Remind yourself that tithing is God's invitation to live by a higher economy, the mathematics of heaven, not scarcity. Step 6. Involve your circle. Tithing is contagious, not solitary. Invite your spouse, family, or close friends into the journey. Pray together. Share your hopes and challenges. For parents, include children. Let them see you give first and let them participate, even with tiny gifts, to plant seeds of faith in their young hearts. The home becomes a training ground for holy habits. Step 7. Expect resistance and miracles. The enemy of your soul will not let go of the territory of fear easily. The first months may be the hardest. Unexpected bills arise, doubts intensify. But every challenge is a test, every act of trust a declaration of war against anxiety. Stand firm. Look for unexpected provision, restored relationships, fresh wisdom. Often God's first answers to obedience are subtle, not showy. Step 8. Expand generosity beyond the tithe. The tithe is the floor, not the ceiling. It's the training wheels of divine generosity. As faith blossoms, let your giving spill over. Offerings, support for those in distress, funding dreams that align with God's kingdom. You will be made rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. 2 Corinthians 9:11. The river grows wider, the soil richer. Step 9. Connect the spiritual and the practical. Bring your budget to God. Invite Him into every financial plan, every new expense, every unexpected increase. Lay spreadsheets at the altar. Ask, how can this reflect your kingdom? The sacred seeps into the secular until the dichotomy vanishes, and every dollar becomes a prayer. Step 10. Celebrate the harvest. Ancient Israel rejoiced with first fruits festivals, meals, singing, dancing, testimonies of what God had done. Continue the rhythm. After a year or a season of tithing, throw a faith party, invite others, share stories, acknowledge that every gain is grace. Celebration seals the habit in your spirit, and praise multiplies blessing. This shows us something profound. Spiritual growth is not a random process, but a rhythm, steady, intentional, alive. Where tithing takes root, trust flourishes. Where trust grows, anxiety withers. Where faith is cultivated through action, the supernatural begins to feel almost natural. Step by step, moment by moment, you are not just changing how you handle money, you are reshaping your entire story, brick by brick, around God's unshakable faithfulness. You might be asking, is it really possible for practical discipline to create such spiritual momentum? The answer is echoed in every page of Scripture, every testimony of the faithful, every life transformed. Yes. God meets you in the act. The numbers on your ledger become the fingerprints of God on your journey. But a final, deeper question remains. What happens when a multitude embraces this practical spiritual rhythm together? What if you're not alone, but part of a living network, each heartbeat rising, each hand open, each story weaving into a tapestry of contagious faith? Stay with me. Because what you will encounter next is not just individual growth, but the mathematics of multiplication released through a community devoted to trust. The next part reveals how connection, story, and shared obedience create miracles no one can hold alone. You're closer than ever to seeing why tithing works, not merely for one, but for many, not only for a moment, but for generations to come. The crescendo of blessing is not just personal, it is shared, profound, and unstoppable. Are you ready to discover the next movement in this divine symphony? The answer is right ahead. Imagine standing in a vast sanctuary, not of stone or wood, but living souls. All around you, voices rise, not in solitary whispers, but woven together in a chorus that vibrates with hope and faith. Here, the mathematics of tithing multiplies in ways no statistician could predict. Many believe the tithe is a private journey, a solitary handshake with God. But the profound truth is, when tithing converges in community, something electric ignites, an exponential force, a revival of abundance that transforms neighborhoods, cities, and even destinies. Let's step into this sacred equation. Picture a congregation, each member quietly surrendering their first fruits. At first glance, each act seems small, almost insignificant. But as tithes flow together, drop by faithful drop, they become a river, surging with power and provision. As Malachi envisioned, Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Malachi 3:10. The storehouse, you see, is not just a physical place. It's the hungry stomach satisfied, the grieving widow embraced, the lonely student held in a tapestry of friendship and care. You might be wondering, can my single tithe truly make a difference in the world beyond me? History answers with a resounding yes. The early church stunned the Roman Empire by pooling resources, not just surviving, but thriving in times of persecution and famine. Widows and orphans found shelter, the sick were nursed. Communities looked on and saw not religious duty, but a new civilization marked by wild, defiant generosity. Tithing became not just a theological idea, but a visible revolution, a proof of a kingdom not built by swords, but by surrendered hearts. Now feel this modern echo. In a church in South Korea, 20 faithful women tithed from their meager fish market earnings. Their combined faith became the seed for an outreach that fed thousands, launched schools, and catalyzed revival. This isn't mere philanthropy. It's the supernatural at work, multiplying loaves and fishes in every generation, everywhere believers dare to give together. This shows us something profound about how God designed his blessings to flow through networks, not silos. The tithe, pooled, becomes disaster relief in times of crisis, scholarships for students, dinners for the isolated elderly. It becomes job training, art programs, addiction recovery, the launching pad for new ministries. Each tithe alone might be a trickle, but united, they can flood the world with hope. Notice the spiritual alchemy. Giving together roots out isolation and jealousy. Celebration replaces comparison. Instead of, "Have I done enough?" the community asks, "How much more can we do together?" Suspense turns to anticipation as each new tithe becomes the possibility of a miracle, unseen but sensed like tremors before a breakthrough. Hidden stories begin to surface. A single mother, once too ashamed to ask for help, finds herself surrounded, her utilities paid and her pantry filled. A teenager, uncertain about her place in the world, is mentored through programs funded by the storehouse. A refugee family, landed in a strange land, receives beds, meals, and warmth, all because anonymous tithers trusted God enough to give. And it doesn't stop with needs met. The psychology of collective generosity rewires the very fabric of a congregation. Studies show that churches and organizations that foster systematic tithing record higher levels of trust, less burnout among leaders, greater resilience in adversity. Volunteers are plentiful. Vision is bold. The church becomes not a place of mere spiritual maintenance, but the epicenter of social and spiritual transformation. Let's make this tangible. Picture your own neighborhood, streets where generosity flows, where lack is met not by government policy, but by the loving action of the collective faith. Imagine food banks that never run empty, tutoring programs for at-risk kids, medical clinics that welcome all made possible because the tithe was never kept behind closed doors. You might ask, does community tithing really shift entire cities? The answer blazes through history's most dramatic spiritual movements. In the Welsh revival, in Azusa Street's Holy Spirit outpouring, communities set aside not just money, but prejudices, status, and self-interest. The result? Crime dropped, businesses flourished, and newspaper headlines told stories of harmony and healing that defied reason. The tithe isn't just arithmetic, it's chemistry, catalyzing transformation far beyond the balance sheet. A hidden blessing unfurls in shared sacrifice. The act of tithing in unity knits hearts together across backgrounds, races, ages, and income brackets. The church becomes a family, the community, a living testimony. God sets the lonely in families, declares Psalm 68:6, and the tithe becomes the invitation into that family, not because you have much, but because what you offer is received, multiplied, and poured back into the world. Even outside faith communities, secular economists marvel at a curious phenomenon. Neighborhoods marked by generosity have lower crime rates, greater trust in institutions, and higher life satisfaction. Why? Because giving together creates accountability, openness, and a sense of shared destiny. The mathematics of the spirit are vindicated on the canvas of sociology. But what about setbacks? The economic droughts, the scandals, the betrayals that ravage even the best communities. Here's the astonishing thing. Research and lived experience prove that tithing communities are the first to rebound. Their network of relationships and shared faith acts as a spiritual immune system, fighting off despair and kindling fresh hope in the ashes of crisis. There is a reason, then, that Scripture paints the most lavish blessings, not on the rugged individual, but how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. Psalm 133:1. The oil of blessing, the dew of provision, flows downward, collective, unstoppable. So as you let this vision settle in your heart, realize your tithe is never lost or lonely. It is always joining with others, always multiplied beyond its origin, always carrying the DNA of the miraculous. When a community tithes, it not only feeds the hungry, it writes new possibilities into the future, creates culture, and makes the invisible God unmistakably tangible. But this raises one last burning question. Behind all the data, beyond the visible miracles, what does it feel like to be swept into this current of shared trust? What stories whisper beneath the surface, waiting to be heard? In the final part, prepare to encounter real voices, raw journeys, and transformative moments where tithing has rewritten destinies. The living proof is coming, the stories that could become your own. Stay close, because the last revelation may be the one that changes everything you thought possible. Let yourself step into a quiet space where life's noise recedes, where story eclipses theory, and experience becomes irrefutable truth. Here, in the mosaic of people just like you, the mathematics of tithing is written not in equations, but in testimonies etched deep within the heart. Many have asked, does tithing really change anything for ordinary people? But the profound truth is, the greatest evidence isn't found in ledgers or doctrinal debates. It's inscribed in the journeys of transformed lives, where want gives way to wonder, and scarcity is swallowed by the revelation of God's faithfulness. Picture Emily, a single mother, burdened under bills that loomed like storm clouds over every dawn. She fought every urge to hold tightly to her meager salary, but something inside whispered, "Test me." Tentatively, she tithed her first tenth, feeling more afraid than faithful, but the days that followed brought provision she didn't anticipate. An unexpected tax refund. Groceries dropped by a friend who just felt led. Even a sense of peace she hadn't known for years. "I realized I was no longer surviving," Emily would later share, "but living, held by something bigger than my paycheck." Or imagine Marcus, a businessman whose tithe began as cold calculation, a line item, nothing more. But as months passed, he noticed something impossible to ignore. His business weathered downturns that crushed his competitors. He was still stretched, still working hard, but there was a rhythm to his blessings. Contracts landing just in time, ideas that unlocked new markets, staff who stayed loyal when others left. When asked, he simply smiled. "I planned for profit but received provision. Tithing taught me to expect the irrationally good." You might be wondering, but what if the blessings aren't material? What if nothing comes back? Listen to Sophie's story. Following a painful divorce, she tithed in secret, not wanting anyone to think I was trying to buy God's favor. For a season, nothing changed on the outside. No windfall, no miracle job. But inside, a fortress of resentment began to crumble. Bit by bit, her heart softened. Joy sparkled again, first in small flashes, then as a constant sunbeam through her days. Tithing wasn't about fixing my finances, Sophie realized. It was about healing my heart. Now imagine this multiplied through a congregation, a city, stories stacking like altar stones, each one testifying to the invisible logic of spiritual obedience. Some speak of illnesses healed, debts forgiven, relationships mended, dreams once buried, resurrected by an act of trust. Others, like Timothy, once skeptical, keeping spreadsheets of his finances, found not only margin in his budget, but an eruption of generosity in his soul. I learned that giving isn't subtraction, it's release, and what comes back can't be measured in dollars, but in the sense of being known, noticed, loved by God and by others. Let the images fill your mind. See the widow who tithes her coins and finds she never runs out. The young artist who gives out of little and receives a grant that unleashes her calling. The retired couple who, after decades of tithing, see their grandchildren thrive in ways they never dared hope. Are these mere coincidences, or the fingerprints of a faithful God responding to the rhythm he set at the beginning of time? This shows us something profound. Personal transformation through tithing is not always instant or dramatic. Sometimes it's slow, a steady accretion of trust layered over days, months, years. The first harvest may not be material at all, but eventually the act of consistent giving forges a kind of holy expectancy. The heart shifts from clenched scarcity to open abundance, primed for miracles both thunderous and tender. And yet, the journey is never without tension. For every headline of breakthrough, there are moments of wrestling, questions in the night, doubts that sting as numbers shrink. You might ask, is this just my imagination? Am I foolish to give when the world says hoard? These are the real crossroads, the places of honest decision where faith becomes sight, not always in visible returns, but in the grit of daily perseverance. Pause now and reflect on your story. Where have you experienced lack? And where, even in small ways, have you dared to trust? What would your life look like if you truly believed that surrender would always lead, in time, to supply? Tithing compels the most personal question of all. Will I trust the giver more than the gift? Perhaps as you listen, a memory stirs, an unexpected check, a timely encouragement, a moment of peace when anxiety should have ruled. Or maybe the nudge to give still battles fear each month. You are not alone. Behind every act of obedience are the silent victories, the invisible scaffolding of grace. Even those who have lost everything bear witness. Tithing, at its core, is about choosing hope against the odds. Sarah, who tithed after losing her job, recalls, "I thought I was planting in barren soil. But what grew out of that practice was faith so fierce I could face anything, because I knew I wasn't doing life alone anymore." If you listen even more closely, you will hear a whisper through all these stories, a challenge rising from the depths. Test me in this. See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven. Malachi 3:10. Each narrative is a living letter, a mathematical proof inked in tears, laughter, and courageous leaps. The tithe, it turns out, is just the beginning of an epic adventure with the divine. This is the secret echoed in every personal testimony. Tithing does not guarantee an easy path, but it does rewrite your journey with miracles, marks of God's fidelity, and the joy that comes only from trust fully given. The stories of the faithful form a tapestry, ancient and always new, one in which you are invited to weave your thread. But as this curtain draws near to closing, there is one final breathtaking truth awaiting you. What if the legacy of your obedience, small, imperfect, yet surrendered, is destined to outlast you, shaping unseen futures and generations you'll never meet. In the end, tithing proves itself not only in mathematics, but in the ripple effect of bold, surrendered lives. What will your story become when you dare to trust the unseen hand? The next chapter is yours to write. Will you step forward into the blessing, the adventure, and the transformation that await? The floodgates are poised to open, if only you will step through. As you've journeyed through the ancient roots, the spiritual mysteries, the mathematical evidence, and the living testimonies of tithing, pause here for a sacred recognition of how far you've come. All these revelations, woven from Scripture's wisdom, poured out in community, proven in real stories, now stand before you like puzzle pieces assembling into a divine mosaic. Perhaps for the first time, you're seeing both the artistry and the arithmetic behind this ancient practice. Now we can clearly see that tithing isn't just a ritual lost in time, nor a test of willpower. It is a dynamic law with real, unfolding consequences that stretch from your heart all the way to generations you'll never know. Every story you've heard, every number and promise is part of a larger pattern, the logic of heaven colliding with the needs of earth, abundance responding to trust, legacy unleashed through one repeated act of obedience. When we bring all these truths together, it becomes clear tithing doesn't simply work in the abstract or only for saints long gone. It works today, here and now, in bank accounts and boardrooms, in paychecks and pantries. The supernatural and the practical converge, unlocking a channel for God's blessing that no budget could ever manufacture. Now feel the crescendo. The emotion isn't just information, it's invitation. Let yourself sense the grand significance of choosing trust when so many choose fear. Hear again the echo of God's challenge. Test me in this. You're not being called to a burdensome duty, but an adventure, a participation in a cycle of provision, restoration, and joy. Tithing isn't about what you lose, it's about what you gain. Peace that outlasts the bills, relationships that thrive, opportunities that come wrapped in surprise. What does it mean to live inside a story where every release becomes increase, every sacrifice a seed, every act of trust a doorway to the miraculous? Let me share a personal moment. A friend who began to tithe during what looked like the very worst season of their life. Bills overdue, income uncertain, hope almost gone. The act felt foolish, even reckless. And yet, over the next 12 months, that household didn't just survive. They were sustained in ways that defied logic. Health restored, new doors opened, friendships rekindled, a joy in their home that hadn't been there for years. You found in the practice of tithing a clarity and confidence that changed every decision. Was it easy? No. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Many live in quiet anxiety, always measuring, always guarding, always asking if what they have is enough. But you're invited to step into a rhythm where faith writes the numbers and God holds the balance. Imagine how your life would change if you took that same step, not as a one-time experiment, but as an ongoing journey. Picture waking up each day knowing that your resources are anchored to a promise deeper than your paycheck. Picture the stress melting, not because circumstances always change, but because your source is now far greater than your supply. When you begin to tithe, you don't just open your wallet, you open your life. You align yourself with possibility, with divine patterns hidden in the very fabric of the universe. This is God's moment for you, not next week, not after the next raise, but right now. Can you sense the urgency, not of demand, but of invitation? So where do you start? Begin by making a decision, quietly or boldly, to put God first with the first tenth of what you receive. Speak it aloud, write it down, bring someone into your circle. Return that tithe not with anxiety, but with gratitude. Accompany the act with prayer. Lord, as I release this, I trust you to hold what I cannot. Watch as stewardship sharpens, contentment deepens, wisdom multiplies. Reach out, join a small group, find a community where giving is celebrated, not pressured. Testify to what you notice, however small, a bill paid, a fear dissolved, a nudge of peace that defies understanding. When you begin to make giving not just a rule but a rhythm, your whole life will subtly, powerfully shift. But don't stop at private transformation. The mathematics of tithing blossoms most extravagantly in community. Find ways to connect your story to others. Serve, share, listen. Become the reason someone else finds hope. A meal on their doorstep, an encouragement at just the right time, a smile that lights up the room. The tithe that leaves your hand has the power to heal far more than budgets. It redeems what scarcity tries to steal. It mends what loneliness breaks. It lifts what despair weighs down. Each time you give, you add a thread to a tapestry of miracles running through your family, your neighborhood, your world. Now I'm asking you, yes, you, what has this journey awakened in your heart? Have you ever tested God, even in a small way, and seen him move? Or are you wrestling with the courage to take your first step? Share your story, your questions, your fears, your hopes in the comments below. Don't let this be a silent transformation. Let it be the beginning of a movement, a testimony that will encourage someone who is right where you were just a moment ago. And if you're longing for more, don't miss what's next. In our coming videos, we'll dive even deeper, unpacking powerful secrets to living in daily abundance, revealing biblical habits that attract favor, and exploring the science behind why gratitude and generosity trigger miracles in the brain and soul. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the divine pattern of blessing is just beginning to unfold. Let your heart hear this one final time. Many live tied to the numbers, but you're invited to trust the one who holds every number in his hand. You're invited to live by a greater mathematics, a pattern of release, return, and revelation, so ancient, so true, that your story becomes undeniable proof. And so, as you walk from this moment, let this promise echo in your soul, circling back whenever you doubt or when fear whispers smallness. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. 2 Corinthians 9:10. Pause. Let those words settle. The God who provides does not run out. Your giving is never wasted. Your trust is never in vain. Now take a breath, step forward in faith, and let the mathematics of heaven begin to multiply in your life. Leave a few moments of quiet reflection, letting this declaration ring in the silence before the screen fades to black.